Yes. Okay. So let's continue with the agenda. I'm gonna give a very short and simple, say, workshop to create your first SBOM. Oh, you can keep it. Doesn't bother me.
Is this yours?
That's yours.
That's mine. Okay.
The idea is to have some practical experience on how you actually make an SBOM. And on the presentation part, I'm gonna be quick because problem, what an SBOM is, everything related to the regulations we already explored during the day. So just again, a bit of background. We know that companies are concerned about software security. That's a statement that we can easily say. And that 98% or around 100% of percentage of software worldwide uses open source components, at least part of it. And so we can say that, yeah, the world runs on software, but mostly on open source software. And the problem there is that if you do the comparison between developers and security professionals, there's a huge gap. This is why Europe, for example, tries to help as a whole the cybersecurity of the different companies. We heard enough about the Cyber Resilience Act. I'm not gonna add any extra word on that. NIS2 is gonna come as well. Same reason, and their SBOMs are present and will be an important part that will be included. And where do they get the inspiration from? Is mainly from the US, because there, as we heard at the beginning of this conference this morning, there's already something in place from 2021 during the Biden government. There's an act that involves the use of SBOM, especially for specific sectors. And there they also defined which are the minimum elements that an SBOM should contain. In that sense, the NTIA, so the agency in the US, was the first one defining it. Now it became a separate entity that still deals with the minimum requirements for an SBOM. Yeah, this is a question that we already answered more or less. Are we all familiar with SBOM at this point? Like, is there still someone who would like more information about it? What I can add is what are the minimum elements, for example, that are requested. Even in the US, where this is clearly stated and defined, the elements are very generic. Like, they're not going too much in depth, but they're asking for high-level definitions or descriptions of what you should include. Some of these components are who's supplying the software, what are the name of the components, some IDs, but we will go through all of them. And then, of course, there's the issue on, well, the question on who should handle this, why, where, what type of assets you should include, and so on. Louder. But also it is difficult to navigate through all the different models and the different guidelines, because at this point there are best practices that are published by several entities. So it's also difficult to understand which one are the minimum requirements for that. This is the reason why we have a project like IIoTSBOM that tries to help the company. Of course, the focus there would be on the industrial IoT devices, but we all have to start from a baseline. And in this sense, it would be the SBOM. Okay, I'm not going again through the various stages of the project. We already had an idea this morning. And of course, there are extra reasons while you're considering industrial IoT in this case. But in general, we're focusing right now on the definition and the creation of your first SBOM. So yeah, again, we know what an SBOM is. If we follow what in the US they're doing and they're defining as the minimum components, and probably even if it's not clear already, EU legislation will very likely follow more or less the same procedures, and they will probably define a document in which they will describe which one are the minimum elements that you should include. So the minimum components that are right now required in the US are including the name of the supplier, who's the organization who's creating the SBOM, naming all the components that are there, the versions that you're asking for or that you're using, an identifier, all the dependencies and the relationship between the various components, the license that you're using, and the date. And the type of format that you should use is one of the main three that are available: SPDX, CycloneDX, or the SWID format. Usually just the first two are the main ones used. So which one should be your very first steps if you want to generate your first SBOM? Well, don't start from scratch. Like at this point, there are several tools that can help you with that. And so the best way to start is to choose an SBOM generation tool. You will have to determine the type of format that you want to use. This is mainly because not all the software today are capable of handle the different formats. There are tools that help you with the transformation from one format to another one, but most of them are still in an early stage. And then what you would do is just simply run the SBOM generation tool on your code, on your project, and check the results. So at that point, especially at the beginning, of course, you have to review what's the first output and make sure that everything there is included as it should be. This is a short list of some of the main open source tools that are available right now. I tried to define the different scopes, the different functionalities that they have, but most of them are constantly updated, which means that they could include extra functionalities. It is also interesting to note that some of them already have a vulnerability scan included, so you can also generate or check on the vulnerabilities on that sense. And of course, the list is longer. There are dozens of tools that are just open source that then you can use. There are commercial solutions as well.
You have tested several?
Most of them, yes. It's also a good practice, especially at the beginning, if you want to generate your very first SBOM, to just don't stick with one, but like try a few of them and see, because some of them might do the same thing. Like some of them are okay for container images. So maybe one of them that uses under the curtains different tools to scan your image might find something extra. And yeah, as I was saying, it's better to go with tools, libraries, and so on that can also provide additional functionalities. So first of all, automation is important, especially while you're constantly modifying and changing your software. That's something that you were explaining very well. As for each new iteration of your code, it's better to automate and have checks that can help you to identify potential vulnerabilities, for example. It could be a possibility to integrate it in your CI/CD pipelines with the same logic, but also because automation usually reduces the number of risks that a human mistake can introduce in the process. And then, of course, there's all the additional components of handling, managing, and track during time, your SBOM, and so on, which can also be extended with additional components like the VEX, for example, just for vulnerabilities. I said there are three main formats, at least used in the US, but we see that here is basically the same. The main two are the SPDX and the Cyclone DX. They're very close to each other. It's like a little differences between the two, but those two are the main used one nowadays. And then once you have your SBOM, of course, it can be used for additional functionalities, mainly to scan for your vulnerabilities. That's one of the main goals of having it. It's also a list of assets of your software that you can constantly consult. If you're doing it for the first time, a good suggestion is to start small and then expand, but slowly. So you start with a closed partial environment or just part of your code, and then you slowly increase so you can easily check that you're not missing anything, for example. We talked about already picking the correct tool. This is also because it might depend on the programming language or your ecosystem to define the SBOM. And again, automation is part of the process. So we want to generate an SBOM. I'll show you the easiest way to do that. Here you can see some of the components that I'm gonna showcase. So we will use the GitHub export tool. I don't know if any of you already knows it. It's very straightforward. I will show how to convert the formats with another open source tool, which is quite famous. We will use dependency track to check some of the vulnerabilities, and then also evaluate the quality of our SBOM. So just a couple of extra words on the GitHub tool, but I'm gonna keep it short because we're gonna have a talk right after me about GitHub. So they introduced something which is available for everyone that uses GitHub. It's already on their platform. It's just a button to press, or if you prefer, there's a CLI extension for that. And they're working on REST API and additional actions and third-party tools that will integrate with it. But I'm gonna show it, so it's gonna be quite.
So meaning if you use GitHub to basically show, present, store your software, and you can actually generate SBOMs overlay.
Yeah, it's already there. And for the ones that are using GitHub, but just very shortly, if you're the owner of your code there, because you actually don't need to host code to generate an SBOM. As a user, you can go and click to the code of anyone. But if you're the owner, then you will have also the Dependabot, which is an automated tool that keeps you updated with the potential updates of your dependencies that you should take care of. And then the dependency track is another tool that is useful to keep track of your SBOMs and your vulnerabilities over the course of time, for example, or over the different versions of your SBOMs. So let's move to something more practical. I wanted to show the example of, okay, this is on the way. I'm gonna do this, I hope. I cannot click on tasks otherwise, on pages. I picked one random open source applications that is available on GitHub. In this case, it's WordPress. I think more or less everyone knows what WordPress is. You can create your website starting from WordPress. And so if you want an SBOM related to the WordPress code that is hosted in GitHub, you go on Insights. And once the page is loaded, you move to the dependency graph, in which it is explained, or it is showcased all the dependencies that the WordPress code has. And on the right, the top right side, there's a button which downloads and generates an SBOM which is NTIA compliant, so with the minimum requirements, more or less. Okay, this is not needed right now because I already did, but basically that's it. You have your SBOM already done. Perfect question. This is an example. Well, if you download it from GitHub, it's basically just one long line. I just readapted a bit so you can read it more or less. But you could see that at the beginning, it contains all the minimum requirements that you would need. Can you read it from there?
XPDX format, right? This is XPDX, yeah.
Yes. So the GitHub tool only provides SPDX formats at the moment. The CLI has also the experimental functionalities for CycloneDX. But so you can see that it explains what type of format you're using, who's the creator, in this case is directly GitHub, and all the other required components. Then let's say that you don't need an SPDX format, but you want to use the CycloneDX format. A good way to do it, well, there are tools that can translate it. In this case, I'm using Sift because it's one of the most famous open source tools. And there's a command which is still as an experimental function, but it works quite well. And then you can ask to convert from one component, from one format to another one. But you will see that the result basically is very similar. I would like to show you the other one. Yes. So this is a CycloneDX format, which more or less keeps a similar structure. The main or the minimum components are still there. If you scroll down, then you would see component by component, the list of them, and afterwards the various dependencies. So you have now the two different formats, so you can actually pick one of the two. Let's say we need CycloneDX because we want to use dependency track, and that tool for the moment only accepts CycloneDX formats. So we open dependency track. I have right now it's hosted on a container and it's running. Here we can keep track of our SBOMs and keep track of our vulnerabilities. So if we start a new project that it includes, for example, the WordPress SBOM that we already downloaded. What you can do is either add the components one by one manually, but of course it will take too much time because in this case you have 1,500 components that you should include, or you can directly upload an SBOM, which is in CycloneDX format. So basically uploading it to the tool, you will have then the list of components available. And together with that, the potential vulnerabilities that code includes. In this case, for the WordPress, there are 11 vulnerabilities present. I downloaded it yesterday, so I don't think they fixed it in the meantime. With the various severity, so the levels, you can check the versions, you can check what's the risk related to it. In this case, it's using the OSS index to check the type of vulnerability. And you can also click and see the actual description and what are the risks related to that. And what you can also do is, say we pick a specific vulnerability, we can define it, whether that vulnerability actually affects our code or it doesn't, or if it's in triage and someone is taking care of it, we can add comments and so on. Which also means that you can then export a VEX that contains all the descriptions of your vulnerabilities and define whether you're working on it or not, and you can include it. You can exchange those. And VEX can also be included directly in the SBOM. So basically, you can re-download the SBOM that I uploaded, but they can also contain the different vulnerabilities that you discovered using this tool. And since when you create this, you also define the version, if then you keep uploading the new versions that you will have either automatically or manually, then you will also could see the evolution of your SBOM.
Yeah. We're now still simply talking about doing this for your internal project.
Yeah.
In essence. If you can decide whenever you want to share this information with your customers or with your partners or whomever that need to develop on the basis of what you do.
Yeah.
So I guess in some of the developments that you guys have been showing before, I guess you'll have probably a web server in there, which is probably open source. So just simply check as an exercise what sort of vulnerabilities are coming along with the web server, whatever sort of tooling that you have in there, and you can provide that alongside. So we give immediate transparency for yourself, potential vulnerabilities, and then also for the ones which will be used after.
Yeah, and then talking about the quality of SBOMs, now they're popping up, let's say, new tools that help you check the quality of your specific SBOM. There's an interesting website that keeps track of how the audience consider the quality of the tools that they're using to generate SBOMs. There are tools specific for Kubernetes or for specific programming languages as Python, for example. But yeah, there are also the main ones as 3V, which is probably one of the most used, or SIFT. And then you also have examples that showcase how a good quality SBOM should be made. So you can download and test it. And there are tools, as I was saying, that help you with the quality of your SBOM.
And in this case, look at the quality is defined by what?
There are a sort of parameters that, depending on the tool, you can also set. But yeah, let me showcase the tool that I downloaded, which is SBOM quality score. So if we get a score from the SBOM that we just generated, you could see that basically it keeps into the account a lot of components that should be there. And it gives you an overall quality score, which in this case, it's 7.3. And those are the different categories that are taken into account. But for most of them, then the categories are customizable. So you can define if you want to be more strict with specific rules, or if you want to include something, that's something that you can add. Okay. Just to conclude, after that, as we said, you have to validate your SBOM. Some suggestions is that, yeah, of course, at the beginning, you have to make sure that you're including all the software components that you're having in the SBOM. And sometimes that might need the inclusion of firmware or the operating system or external applications. It really depends on your software. You need to make sure that all the metadata that are requested are included, so the name, the version, and so on, including, if you want, already the vulnerabilities, because that's an option. And at the beginning, you had to compare it with your source code, basically, or as I was saying before, use multiple tools that can achieve or create an SBOM for your code, and then compare them. And if you have additional products, additional documentation, or any other relevant material that you want to include, I mean, the more you can include, probably the better it is. IIoTSBOM has the website in which you can find more information about our project in general, and healthsec as us for all the projects that we are involved. I think I will skip on what you already said this morning about the different projects. And this is it. Do you have questions or comments about now or later?